Bueno, muy bienvenidos a todos.
Welcome to this session. Welcome to this panel on service learning in higher education during the pandemic. Once again, apologies for the technical difficulties. We've been working until the very last minute to address them all. You have simultaneous interpretation available. At the bottom of the screen, you can choose your language. And in that way, you will be able to listen to the language of your choice. Belén Chaparro is also joining us from CLAYSS to help us. We also want to thank Gabriel Ilacio that have been working in the preparations for this panel, speaking with the panelists. And on this session, we have quite a global panel here, so we are going to go straight into the introductions. We are going to take a few more minutes for this session. I'm Luisa Arocha. I will be the moderator for this panel. And I want to send greetings to Andrés Pregari, who was going to moderate this panel, but he is ill, so we wish him soon recovery. So our panelists will have 20 minutes for their presentations, and then we will have 10 minutes from a commentator. The chat will not be available during the presentations, but once all the presentations have been given, we will enable the chat in order to have questions from the audience. So take note of the questions you may have along the presentations, and then you can put them in the chat. We have Manuel Caire from the Catholic University of Chile, Dr. Mathew Pink from the Australian Catholic University, also Professor Sonia Antezana Alzamora from the San Marcos University of Peru, and Adriana Rainaga from the University of Mexico, and finally Thomas Farnell of the Institute for the Development of Education from Zagreb, Croatia. And as I was telling you, this is quite an interesting global panel. We are going to listen to different perspectives, and before each presentation, I'm going to briefly read the bios of the different panelists. Now we can start with Manuel Caire. Manuel Caire from the Catholic University of Chile is a social worker and has a master's degree in social psychology. He has also a diploma on social university responsibility. He is currently the head of the service learning program of the Teachers Development Center in Chile. He has a broad experience in events and congresses, both at the national and international level, and he in different publications. He's a friend of ours. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you again for the invitation. This is my 5th participation in this seminar, and personally, and our university is always present. We truly miss being in person with you. This event in person is also different, and we always remember that and we treasure that, and we hope that this pandemic will finally allow us to get together again. So what I have here to share with you is a kind of a summary of what we've been developing in 2020, 2021 as to service learning during the pandemic. Our university is one of the universities in the region that has been implementing service learning projects for quite some time now. And as a result of that experience, today I would like to share an overview of our recent past. I will start with some slides, perhaps you've seen them already. Our experience started 17 years ago when we started with this program in 2004, even earlier than that, when here at my university, a discussion started about other curricular ways of formally incorporating the social field in subjects that had a methodology and an approach that could be applied to the reality. That was the beginning of service learning. And based on our definition, in our academic secretariat. It's all those tools that use the content learned in the class to connect it with challenges faced by the communities. It's a purely curricular approach. And I'm going to share some examples later on. This is the timeline. As I said, the program started in 2004, and the first 5 or 6 years, it was a process of calling, encouraging, generating a critical mass of teachers from different schools, even students that promoted that. And that was very interesting. Those of us that were part of the initial project realized the institutional importance of this. An initial lesson in these 17 years is that service learning is stronger when there's an institutional support, but also when it's consistent with the mission and the educational concept. Not because it's a Catholic university. There are many Catholic universities that have not incorporated service learning institutionally. Our position from the very beginning was to find a reason in the curricula, but always related to the educational project. And as a result, in 2010, we started a project to institutionalize service learning, but in the different courses. We already had a program that was very strong, but in 2010, we realized there was an important interest in many academic units or courses to incorporate this formally in their curricula. Identifying courses that permanently could implement this, identifying faculty members that could be trained, and social organizations with whom there could be a permanent contact. In the next 5 years, this gave way to the formalization of an institutionalization model of service learning at the university. There's a model that has been published. We have a guide that you can consult. And finally, in 2018, we created our own self-assessment rubric to see the level of institutionalization of service learning. As I'm sure you know, that has a tradition and a way of doing things that was interrupted with the pandemic. And at the same time, that generated new questions in the team. I think the pandemic brought about a huge challenge, big obstacles, but also questions we had never asked before. And as a result of that, today we are reflecting about the ways we relate to one another, the ways we educate, and also how to understand how a service learning project should work. As to figures in courses, up to last year, before the pandemic, our concern was whether these subjects would continue developing these projects. And you tend to think that the virtual context was going to discourage the development of service learning projects. But on the contrary, as you can see, 148 subjects have included virtual service learning, which is an amazing number for our institution. This number was increasing. We feared the number would remain lower, but it was always above 100 courses. And in 2021, amazingly, it's almost out of the slide, 226 courses have implemented service learning. And this means an important challenge in our team. This increasing number of courses increase more consultancy we provide to the faculty, more training, and also a bigger supply as to how we provide that support. I'm also going to show this later on. Some examples that I would like to share with you about the implementation from my university, how we've been developing this. Well, today's panel will also offer the possibility of seeing different perspectives. But how do we approach this in my university? This is the first course, Topics in Biology, at the School of Biological Sciences, first year. And they develop these devices for scientific transfer or dissemination that historically was done in person in the public schools in my country. But now it was done remotely through these audiovisual capsules. So we have to adapt everything there. There you have the teachers, Loreto and Carolina. They had to adapt their strategy and very creatively in order to facilitate this material that were powerful and significant for those schools. The second example is a psychology course at the School of Social Sciences. This introduction to community psychology worked directly at a territory that is very close physically to the campus where we are located. It's an area that historically has had lots of intervention and also stigmatized permanently as to being an area of violence and powerful social actions. And the School of Social Sciences created a collaboration agreement with this territory to generate a medium and long-term work. This is one of the courses that I've been assisting with. And during the pandemic, it generated like a record of social, cultural institutions to identify key actors. That's very interesting because it's a course that could have been mainly theoretical during the pandemic. But anyway, they conducted this work of diagnosis of the territory, interviewing the different members through technology. And this record, this registry, was provided to the municipality. This is a third example. It's physical therapy in specialties. It's from the course of physical therapy. And they developed tele-rehab therapies using platforms like Zoom to work with the elderly. And they used to have synchronous in-person sessions, but it was accompanied by educational materials so that they could exercise after the sessions in their personally. So these are three different cases from three different schools, and I'll continue with this one because this work of physical therapy is considered a success story. There's a video for the three cases. It's posted on YouTube. We can share the link with you. And these are experiences that you can find and multiplied by 148 last year and over 200 this year. Physical therapy specifically is a course in my university that started a process 2 years ago of institutionalizing this methodology. That means acknowledging that throughout the education, the students will have 4 courses with service learning from the first to the 4th year. And that is a huge value. That is, regardless of the faculty in charge of that course, the school assumes this engagement to have a social impact on those students, but also on the community through the discipline. And how did we achieve this result? And this is part of the work we always do with my team. We conducted this institutionalization, started with a work committee. We make a diagnosis, an analysis of the evidence nationally and internationally. A proposal is designed, analyzing cross-cutting skills to develop in these courses. We develop the first pilots, identify the community partners, and we evaluate the process. All this process ends with a course that has identified courses with skills, trained faculties, a teacher that is the coordinator internally in this course. She's the coordinator of service learning, and with publications that shows the specific results of the implementation of service learning. What I'm showing here is one of the success stories that we have about the institutionalization of service learning. And there are many other outcomes of this experience that I have no time to share with you, but they are very interesting. Then you can continue doing some research. Some core elements in these past 2 years is that we've kept training teachers, providing advice for planning. We have maintained something that is key for this university, and that is consistency between learning goals, the expected results, and service, something we cannot neglect. Whatever the context, everything that is done in the context of service learning responds to a genuine need of a community and also to the learning results expected of a subject. This is not volunteering, this is not charity, this is not something asystematic. It's part of the consistent relationship between the curricula and the community. We've also intensified our reflection and our assessment. We are generating new devices for the faculty members to have inputs in this context to generate that evidence. And finally, we have created our new models and supporting material that I'm going to share with you right now. This has allowed the team to learn again. This is an exercise of relearning about service learning connected to another tool. For instance, we generated this ethical protocol to work during the pandemic that combined many recommendations that were scattered, perhaps, about how to face a service learning process, but now in the context of the pandemic. We generated a guidance document for service learning in the pandemic and e-learning, e-service learning process, also a kit of digital tools to enhance service learning courses in this context. And recently, less than a week ago, we launched this guide of interdisciplinary service learning that combines a series of reflections resulting from these 17 years that we see that now more than ever, we need to think of challenges not from a single disciplinary perspective, but multidisciplinary. So many resources are now being generated. Last year, despite the context, many initiatives were developed, and we managed to create this like an annual report that collects more than 50 experiences during the pandemic. Then I will share these materials in the chat. I will share the links with you. They are public documents. If you have any question, of course, I'm going to share this. This annual report is available in Spanish and in English for the English speakers, if you're willing to know about the experience. And these are some final results. And now I'll be concluding. This is a learning community that has been created, teachers, students, and the community that are working and thinking of new ways of developing service learning. We are also working on this website for the reflection on service learning. We are improving the website. It's going to be English and Portuguese and Spanish, of course. And those that are interested in finding strategies to enhance reflection in their courses, well, here they can find fresh inputs, innovations, and also very well planned for you to use them. We are about to finish a table game that will also be virtual. It's related to sustainable development goals. It will be a game that will also enhance our courses in terms of reflection on service learning. And for any other subject or any other university that would like to use it, it's going to be available. A few weeks ago, we launched an interdisciplinary inter-university lab on professional practices where we got together with students from several universities to think of a social project and turn it into a virtual platform to show the reality of our country through augmented reality material. Then the project we expect will finish in December and then it will be launched. We are generating more links with the communities through meetings, and we also having new meetings this year. We created a podcast where we also developed new platforms to connect to the faculty members and those that may be interested. And in November, we're going to have the third service learning seminar in the context of a seminar on teacher innovation. We're going to invite you. And all these things would not be possible without a team behind, a team of professionals, students, assistants, interns that share all their knowledge. We have people here from social sciences, from engineering. They contribute their knowledge, their passion for the topic, and their way of understanding teaching that cannot be thought of between four walls, not only the head, the heart, and hands, but also the consistency that every university should have. Thank you for the space, Luis. And well, I will stop here so that the other speakers can also speak. Excellent, Manuel. Thank you so much. for you, for your team. We know that there at the Catholic University of Chile, you have a great team, but also leaders that are supporting the education of their teams, and you always have very resources to share, and you're very generous about it, so thank you. Now we're going to receive Dr. Mathew Pink. We thank him especially for his presence, considering the time difference we have with Australia. What time is it there, Mathew?
It is now 3:40 a.m. in Brisbane. No problems. I was very, very excited for the contact and for the opportunity to present.
Déjenme comentarles que el doctor Mathew Pink.
Let me tell you that Dr. Mathew Pink is the National Community Engagement Manager at Australian Catholic University. His research areas of interest include the transformational processes of university community engagement, support for positive youth development in developing and developed nations, and elite athlete welfare and development. Mathew is passionate about harnessing the power of universities and communities to achieve mutually beneficial outcomes, and we are witnessing his level of commitment because he is early in the morning joining us to share his experience with us. Go ahead, Mathew.
It's a privilege to be here presenting to you all and participating in the panel. So thank you very much. As mentioned before, I live in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia, but for our traditional owners, the Turrbal and Yagara country. So I just want to pay my respect to the elders past and present in the land that I present on. I'm here to talk today about Australian Catholic University and our service learning during the pandemic. Now, to disambiguate a little bit for you, at Australian Catholic University, we call service learning community engagement. So every time I use the words community engagement, just know that in this particular panel, I'm talking about our service learning program at ACU. Now, Australian Catholic University, for those who aren't familiar, there are 8 campuses across Australia and also a campus located in Rome. We're very fortunate to have a presence there in Rome. And that adds up to more than 34,000 students and greater than 2,000 staff members. However, that slightly based on market forces. Community engagement is critical to ACU mission, and within that, service learning is critical to the work that we do. And in particular, our mission elements that this is intrinsically tied to is the pursuit of knowledge, supporting and affirming the dignity of the human person, and working for. So where is service learning at ACU? Well, it's within something called our core curriculum, which is a curriculum that all students at ACU have to undertake, no matter what they are studying. And the core curriculum is comprised of 3 units of study, or I know our US colleagues call it 4 subjects. It might make more sense to you. And that is 2 university core curriculum units that are common to most undergraduate programs, where students learn about the principles of social justice in a global world through the prism of the principles of Catholic social thought. And we are a Catholic university. But as the third articulation of that, there is a discipline-specific core curriculum community engagement unit that is specific to each program, whether that be, for example, business or law or theology as another example. And that provides the opportunity to live out that core curriculum in service with the community. So essentially the service learning unit of study. So overall at ACU, that equates to 20 course units of community engagement placements involved. And that adds up to nationally nearly 4,000 students who take community engagement service learning each year. So a substantial program to manage and hopefully raise the standard over time. Of course, we all know what happened last year. Enter COVID-19. It was a massive disruption for much of higher education globally, including in Australia. We recognise our privilege and are grateful in Australia that the pandemic did not hit as hard as many other countries in the wider global world. However, many of the measures that we used to limit the spread of COVID-19 in Australia meant that we also experienced great disruption in education. For example, nearly all placement opportunities or service learning opportunities were suspended. They simply did not happen in physical form. And I appreciate Manuel's comments before. There is something special about being in person, whether that's physically in a service learning person, physically at a service learning conference, or even around the water cooler at our higher education institutions. And much of that was lost. So we started to ask questions, well, how can our students progress in their degree programs, their service learning studies, when it's relied on a placement experience? And how could we be agile and adjust to such an elaborate institutional structure? 4,000 students, that is a lot of students out there working in the community. And a case study that we wrote about this can be found in Transform, the Journal of Engaged Scholarship, which is an Australian journal on university engagement broadly defined, and within that service learning as well. So we were stuck with this problem or challenge, and I prefer to see problems and challenges as opportunities. So the first thing we had to do, and apologies for using the buzzword of 2020 pivoting, but that is exactly what we had to do with the placement. The first thing that we needed to try and do was to move online wherever this was possible. And there were some sort of projects with the community that quite easily were shifted online. And some examples of that are our autism inclusion program, which involved peer mentoring. That actually translated quite well to an online setting. Another example is International English Language Student Peer Support Program, that Australia takes a lot of international students to complete degree programs where we are. And we set up a lot of programs to provide social support, but also English language support. From an ethical standpoint, meaning that we hope through these programs that international students have a better time, their Australian degree program, but also in Australia in general. Other examples that translated quite well. Surprisingly, some of our international service learning projects in Solomon Islands and Vanuatu, we were able to shift some of that engagement being online, and there's been some great benefits that were increased some of our engagement with these other countries, where normally it was trip-based, you know, where students and staff would fly to the Solomon Islands or fly to Vanuatu. However, for many partnerships, shifting online simply was not possible. The nature of the service learning program and project is that it couldn't happen in person. It really couldn't happen. And in reality, the programs that were able to shift online were not going to cater for the 4,000 students who find, you know, appropriate service learning opportunity. It not necessarily meet the requirements of our partners. So this great disruption across the nation, which I know you would be familiar with in different manifestations in your own countries. Of course, we needed to then source further online opportunities. We realised this was the only medium that we could use for some time. All of a sudden, online service learning opportunities were favourable, and it opened up our eyes to opportunities we had been closed-minded to, but perhaps we're less at the forefront of our thinking. So the other thing that we needed to do, and I want to talk about today, was developable assessment. The reality we were presented with is that not every student at ACU would get engaged in a physical or even virtual service learning experience. So what to do in this instance, because they also had a right to progress through their educational programs, but at the same time we did not want to sacrifice the quality of their education in doing so. So it was a difficult place to be in. And one of the things that we did was put a lot of thought and effort into developing on alternative assessments. And what they became was prospective alternative assessments. So one example is One project was for students to complete research on a community organisation and reflect upon their prospective engagement in the framework of ACU's CE principles. And you can see the CE principles on the right there. We have 5 at ACU that we base all of our community engagement skills learning work on. Developing understanding, acting with humility, building connections, affirming dignity, and pursuing social justice. And these principles are grounded in the principles of Catholic social thought and the Catholic intellectual tradition. On the screen there are only short descriptions of what those principles are. However, there is a deeper description of each principle I can share with the group after the presentation. So this was one example, and we had a situation where, based on our semester structure, some students were partway through their service learning before they had to cease, and others had not yet begun. So we designed a assessment of 15 hours for those who had begun and had to stop. And then we developed a longer alternative assessment, which involved a literature review on a community issue, challenge, or problem, and what would be effective engagement methods as per the service learning literature and as per the Catholic identity and mission of Australian Catholic University, which took 35 hours as well. Again, there is no way that I'm going to claim that these alternative assessments would equal a real-life service learning experience. However, we were left with little choice in light of this. Another thing that we needed to do is, as we neared the end of our first semester that was disrupted by COVID, we realised, well, debriefing and reflection at the end of semester is such a critical component of the service learning experience for our students, and coming to those higher level readings and abstractions that show that their thinking and their frames of assumption have been transformed through the service learning experience. Well, for many, that just didn't happen. So an idea that we had was to look at the debriefing and reflection at the end and actually make COVID-19 a subject. So we thought, well, COVID-19 is a teaching moment, really a once in a 100 teaching moment. So, and it is pervasive. It has impacted just about everybody in the world in some way. So I remember pitching this idea at a staff meeting, and before I knew it, the very talented Miss Eleanor Duggan from ACU had turned around and developed this class, which was absolutely fantastic, an online debriefing workshop using GIBS principle, and getting the students to reflect on and look at how COVID-19 has impacted the learning experiences of students. Well, it's something they had a lived experience of. The group's experience, disadvantage, and marginalisation. I can't speak what has occurred in your country, but I know in Australia, those most impacted by the pandemic have been those who experienced the most disadvantage and marginalisation already. It really brought that to bear in Australia. And of course, for us, it created newly vulnerable groups. The pandemic created newly vulnerable groups that perhaps were doing well before the pandemic. Of course, a concern remained for us as to what this would have on the student experience and their ability to learn. And Dr. Jenna Zordagun completed some fantastic evaluation work in 2020. What is interesting is that nearly all, or 92% of students who did not have an opportunity to attend a placement felt that the alternative task led to at least a moderate increase in their understanding of community engagement or service learning, which we thought was surprisingly high. We had some big concerns about how effective this would be. 65% rated this increase as a lot or a great deal. And I will take digital service learning any day of the week, because it's also about our partners and what, the mutuality and reciprocity. But again, these are interesting learnings for the future. When we asked how this experience could have been improved, 35% box that said virtual placements. So if they could have had an online opportunity, they would have done that. And then 32% suggested guest speakers in their lecture content. And we thought that was really interesting, was feedback from some of our partners who did give guest lectures was it was a way for them to stay connected and engaged and work at a time when they were locked down, many of us. We also had the privilege and needed to respond to our community during the pandemic as well, because we were hit hard. And what we noticed, and I've talked about newly vulnerable groups before, is that international students in Australia were affected by COVID-19. Australia are paying, so they pay large amounts for their course, but while they're living in Australia, they usually rely on casual work, economy, and other means of employment to keep themselves financial and afloat. And much of this work shut down during the pandemic for many, many months at a time. And of course, there was limited eligibility for international students to receive government support. So all of a sudden, they experienced more vulnerability than ever before. So we partnered with Federation University, which is a competitive university. So it was also great to see that level of collaboration to provide food and essentials in the city of Ballarat. One of our university partners, St. Mary's House of Welcome, it was interesting. We'd always be in service with them, but basically working with their members. And it was really affirming to have them all of a sudden come to us and say, hey, look, you know, we can also bring support to you. And they made 500 meal packs available to our international students in Melbourne. And that was a real beautiful thing to see our partners kind of, you know, come to our call as well. So I guess as I move towards the end of my presentation, I want to reflect on some of the things that we learned. And point number one is that deep, established, and institutionally embedded community engagement service learning can be a platform for curricular agility during a time of crisis. It's really useful that referring back to Andrew Furco's work, that we have a central agency at ACU that champions and supports the curriculum. It meant that we could respond and provide support, as the one that I mentioned there below. Many of our lecturers really were in a time of crisis when their programs were all of a sudden uprooted and able to. What else did we learn? Well, we came to a greater but cautious openness to online community engagement opportunities where they could be beneficial. And I think we've seen globally that done well, a lot can be achieved online. Maybe I'm aging, but I still have a bias towards digital opportunities. But again, they've shown that they can be highly effective and done well. What are some of the challenges that I see ahead? Well, one of those is the viability of our campus, our 7 campuses that are heavily geared toward the physical education experience. I think the genie is out of the bottle, so to speak, with respect to online education, both with respect to service learning, but also generally. So I think we need to reinvent some of our campus spaces as community precincts. It's purely about the education of our students. And actually, I think that links in well with a lot of the literature around community or universities that anchor institutions of the community. So I'd like to see campuses in the future become precincts where several community organisations are operating out of there, several health and community services available to the wider community, and where the students aim to come to more than just lectures and tutorials. They're actually coming for an experience. So the question I ask is, what are the reasons students and staff will come to campuses to their education? I think we need to embrace the online age of higher education and also making sure our students are adequately supported before, during, and after their service learning experiences. And that has to be done effectively online, even when they do go back to physical placements. Thank you, everyone, for the time, and I'd be happy to respond to questions and open up discussions. As I mentioned, it's a great privilege to present this afternoon in South America and this morning in Australia.
Muchísimas gracias, Tomás, por nuestro privilegio de escucharte, toda la sistematización, los aprendizajes y las
Thank you so much. It's been a privilege for us to listen to you, all the activities, all the projects you conducted at the Catholic University of Australia. After the presentations, we're going to have the comment from Thomas Farnell, and then we're going to have some time for questions. So now we have Professor Sonia Antezana Alzamora. Are you there, Sonia? Yes, how are you? Professor Sonia, welcome. Antezana, she's from the Universidad Mayor San Marcos, Peru. She has a degree in nutrition, health sciences. She's the chair of the Social Responsibility Committee of the Professional Nutrition School. And she's also at the Social Responsibility Committee at the university. She has a Magister in Education and Management, full-time teacher at the Nutrition Department in the School of Medicine of the University of San Marcos. She has written publications in her specialty, both on health and social responsibility. Sonia, the floor is yours. Thank you for the invitation. I'm going to share my screen.
Se puede observar, ¿verdad?
Sí, sería bueno verla.
Can you see that? Yeah, it would be great if you shared it in full presentation mode. Otherwise, it's fine. No worries. Okay, go ahead. So taking into account the context of the pandemic and the state of emergency due to coronavirus, different gaps have been identified in our country. Can you hear me all right? I'm sorry. I think I'm having some trouble. Yeah, Sonia, perhaps you can open your PDF file. We can see it better.
Exactamente.
Sí.
Sí, perfecto. Si puedes ponerlo en modo presentación, mejor. Si no, adelante, Sonia. Escuchamos bien.
Les decía que nosotros tomando en
So,
consideración.
as I was saying, taking into account the pandemic and the state of emergency as a result of coronavirus, there are different gaps in our country, and that has led to huge inequalities, and that has led to most human beings to fall into poverty. So as a university, we've been thinking of what to do to face this challenge in our country. So we thought of what is service learning? It's an important methodology. It's a method of teaching that combines community service with academic education to develop this critical, reflexive thinking, as well as social responsibility. And we know that service learning programs engage students in community service that is well organized and intended to improve the community and their needs. As at the same time, we develop academic skills, civic responsibility, and community engagement. We know that those that participate in a service learning project are the faculty members, students, community partners. And who are the beneficiaries? Who is the program targeting? Well, basically, the university community, society as a whole, vulnerable populations, and partner organizations. So with the social approach of university or academia, and considering the educational model of San Marcos and the emergency model that we identified for us, we thought that the service learning methodology is going to help our students interrelate with the community, and therefore they should have that social thinking, that social approach, that attitude of mutual assistance. So as part of our social responsibility department, we tried to motivate. This was before the pandemic, and we started with this experience of service learning. We also launched the first social responsibility program. We called it Multidisciplinary Strengthening in the Special Basic Education Center. And this encouraged students and also professionals, as well as our community as a whole. And the first experience of this multidisciplinary strengthening allowed us to work with the community, and it was very nice because it was a multidisciplinary experience with the participation of schools like dentistry, education, sociology, etc. And we provided care to children that had issues. And actually, this project was very interesting because it was conducted not only in one semester, but then it continued. And to this day, students and teachers and faculty members that are engaged with society continue conducting this work. We also consider analyzing different kinds of social programs at the university. These are healthcare projects, speaking of, well, oral health, environmental management, the development of territorial social responsibility skills, the level of perception of social responsibility in trainees in 5 professional schools of the School of Medicine, to hear what they thought about social responsibility as part of their education and training. This other project was also very interesting, about beliefs and food practices among mothers of children with anemia in the rural area of Jaujas, and then a situational diagnosis for the implementation of a healthy university, having social responsibility as an access in public university. These are only some examples of programs that we conducted on social responsibility. And then, during the pandemic, we started thinking what to do. You can conduct these service learning projects during the pandemic. Well, that was a question, actually. We socialized and we motivate our teachers to conduct this kind of projects. And as a result of that, we created this project, Healthy Body in a Healthy Mind, Learning Among Friends, Free Time, Healthy Time. All these projects have been targeted to the community, to different target audiences. And the student has actually realized that they can give their knowledge to the population, to society. And at the end, we held a fair, like a roadshow of projects where students and teachers presented their outputs. And this has encouraged our students and teachers also from other schools to keep working along this line. Here, for instance, we present this is a project that is our group is called Power Donor, Healthy Body in a Healthy Mind. In Peru, we have promoted and encouraged donation, organ donation, blood donation. So in order to encourage this attitude and to reach people, we created some groups. As part of the service learning projects, the educational sector with the School of Education carried out several service learning projects, such as this one, the level of knowledge of radiological protection in students at the pre-university center. That was done at the School of Medicine. Child art for primary education teachers, that was done with the School of Education. Like living the art, knowing strategies. I'm a happy teacher of kindergarten in the rural area of Barranca, for instance. At the School of Medicine, we have conducted programs of physical therapy to improve the physical capabilities in patients with respiratory sequels from COVID-19. And this has been very important because I'm sure you know that in our country, we've had a lot of COVID cases. So this has helped mitigate the effects and improve the health of our patients as a result of COVID. Another interesting program was the guidance for COVID-19 prevention and control in high school students in a school in Lima. The perception of the stress in a basic education center, special education center, because as a result of this situation, our children and the population as a whole is suffering from some kind of stress. At the School of Medicine, we also conducted this program for awareness on electromagnetic radiations in the medical practice among the trainees at the Professional School of Nursing. We also had the educational intervention of the management of the SARS-CoV-2 results at the district of San Juan de Lurigancho, the efficacy of an educational intervention and the level of knowledge on the management of results of SARS-CoV-2. As academia, we've tried to present and conduct different kinds of service learning projects, motivating our students to social engagement. And this is not only at the School of Education or the School of Medicine. There we have 5 schools under the Faculty of Medicine. We have nutrition, nursing, obstetrics. As part of our healthcare areas, we also have psychology. And in all these areas, we've tried to conduct different types of service learning projects. Here, for instance, this is some information about the program Move, Sit, and Feel Good. During the pandemic, we've seen a lot of issues related to posture, the posture of all students and those that work from home, for instance. And as a result, we organized this program. We have more programs like this guidance for prevention and control of COVID in different schools, values for all, also in primary education, with strategies to learn together, general studies optimizing learnings and skills for professional life, radio educating, that was interesting. It was it shows the effectiveness of an educational project at the level of knowledge on radiological routine procedures in adults from 18 to 65. This is the flyer of the respiratory rehab program. A patient that is at a hospital and is then discharged And the external support outside the hospital is sometimes difficult in our country because of the large number of patients we have. So the young students at the Professional School of Medical Technology in the area of rehab presented this program, and they reached a large number of individuals that felt very well supported as to their respiratory rehab after COVID. Service learning projects also related to education, as I said, well, there have been several, always trying to work not only with the students, but also with the teachers in order to motivate them and teaching them some of these strategies, these methodologies, so that the students feel much better in their classes during the remote lessons. For instance, here we have some pictures about children's art for primary education teachers at the rural areas of Ayacucho and Barranca. And during these times, this remote learning, virtuality, has helped us a lot to reach places where perhaps we wouldn't have been able to reach in person because of the lack of financial resources. The students have been increasingly motivated, and now they are aware that they can conduct and they can create different types of educational materials, and they can share them remotely. And that's very important because this has sparked creativity among kids. When we asked the students how they felt, what they thought about this intervention, many of them have discovered that some of them are great artists, great communicators, and perhaps they have skills that they didn't even know they had, and they share that with their community and, of course, with adults and peer students. Here, for instance, these are some of the education courses, and the learning has included reflecting about the drawing and painting context, technique, materials, tools, what materials and tools are relevant and low cost to benefit the artistic work of the teacher. You know that in very remote areas in our country, sometimes the financial restrictions are very hard and very high. So the teacher has to be creative to reach those students. In this year and a half that we've been working remotely, the teachers have had to be very creative to present different methodologies that are relevant for their students. As to the service part, well, that implies facilitating teachers in the rural areas of Ayacucho and Barranca access to the artistic techniques for them to experience their creativity with different materials, motivate teachers to obtain paints with low-cost materials and from their environment, contribute to the emotional well-being of teachers in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. At the beginning of this pandemic, the teachers felt demotivated, stressed, because we've had to learn many new things and methodologies in order to reach our students. And this program has contributed to that. And at the end, an assessment and evaluation was conducted, and both the teachers and the target audience were benefited. Well, some reflections. We've received some feedback from our group that participated in these service learning activities. And throughout the community, for instance, I quote one, "I ask you to keep providing your gift with as warmth that humbleness that is so essential in the life of human being to make us aware and achieve our common well-being. This is a teacher from Barranca. And another teacher says, I felt very happy and I really like to participate in the 2 workshops where I learned a lot, new strategies using recycled materials that I will have to use with my students. Okay, I would like to say that for our university, it's been very interesting to use this methodology of service learning because both the target community and the students and the teachers are interrelated, and we've motivated our teachers and students for them to continue along this path. So much so that the General Department of Social Responsibility of the university has invited several universities from our country. And so we have a network that is called REURSA, where we are all gathered to work along the same line and replicate this in all universities in Peru to improve the current situation in our country. And we know that as academia, we can do a lot. That is what I wanted to share with you today, and I thank you so much for your patience. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Sonia, from the Mayor de San Marcos University from Peru, telling us about your experience there. It is interesting to see how the pandemic has opened the door to resilience in universities that perhaps in other settings that would not have happened. Now we are going to welcome our last panelist, and later on we are going to have comments by Thomas Farnell, and we will open the chat for questions. So from Mexico, let's welcome Dr. Adriana Rainaga from the National Autonomous University of Mexico. She has a PhD in political and social sciences, a master's degree in communication, and she's a full-time lecturer at the School of Political and Social Sciences of that university. She belongs to the National Researchers System, and as part of her teaching and research interests, we can find organizational theory and analysis, civil society, university volunteering programs, and social capital. Welcome, Adriana. You have the floor. Hello. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for listening to me. It is my pleasure to share this panel with these wonderful colleagues that have shown such relevant experiences carried out in their institutions. I would like to start my comments, which are going to be quite brief, going back to what Manuel did at the beginning. And the Catholic University in Chile had the spirit of service, not necessarily linked to the fact that it was a Catholic university. And I'm going back to that comment because that was precisely the origin of our research study. We believe that the National Autonomous University of Mexico has a long track record of service because it is a public university. It is a university with a long tradition and broad experience, and that has been working with the society for a long time. So that led us to think that we had to find a way to analyze what was viewed as service learning by faculty members. This started 3 years ago. It started as a research project, as an analysis involving myself as the lead for the project, and 5 students with scholarships. So over these 3 years working for the project, we realized that we cannot only focus on the research component, that it is impossible for us to look into service learning with the eyes of outsiders, that it is very important to get involved and to start doing things in order to obtain better results. And over the course of these 3 years, we achieved very interesting results. The students participating in the project had played a central role in the project. So I'm here just as a spokesperson, because actually what I'm going to share with you is the result and the actions of the students involved in this project. So I'm just the official presenter of this work. So they have participated in activities to create the service learning network of Mexico. We received support from CLAYSS, and we engaged with 7 educational institutions and 1 civil society organization, and the students were deeply involved in the setting up of that national network. And another relevant product is the one that I'm going to show you now, this manual on service actions during the pandemic. What is it that the students did? They gathered information over a period of 3 months, information on more than 75 service-oriented experiences, actions that had been carried out not only in our university, but throughout Mexico, as well as in some international organizations. So by compiling all these service experiences specifically related to the pandemic, these were the sources of information. They used digital networks and web pages, and they were able to see and disseminate information on what they were trying to do. They did this in order to see what was happening at the global level. They also wanted to determine whether those experiences could be considered a service learning experience. When analyzing these 75 experiences, they realized that they have to set some boundaries, and those boundaries had to do with the following. There should be faculty or teachers involved, and that students have to be involved also in these actions. These are some examples that show how they define these criteria. There were some actions, some experiences carried out by organizations where you have one of the stakeholders present, but not necessarily both of them. So this definition led us to specify the following characteristics for analysis purposes. The first one was that the actions being examined had to aim at meeting a social need. The second one was that students should play a leading role in those experiences. And the third characteristic is that these actions should be intentionally or not intentionally linked to learning content. These were the 3 characteristics that they had to find in these experiences in order to determine whether they belong to the category of service learning experiences. And if that was not the case, what teachers or students have to do in order to effectively turn them into service learning projects. Here you see the different categories for the analysis performed. Quite easily, they decided to assign a color to each of the quadrants where these actions could be placed. Why did they do it like this? Because this manual was later on going to be used also for teachers' training. The idea behind it was that all teachers and university faculty that would consult this material could clearly understand which were service learning activities and which were not. So they could easily refer to one of these quadrants. And this was very clear from a visual standpoint. So this is the manual. This is a picture of the manual. This is available to the public. It is a digital manual that is loaded on UNAM's webpage. We have already shared it with CLAYSS, and of course we are going to share the link for those of you who would like to have a look at it. The manual describes the action, and in the central circle, the second one, the manual tells you whether this action falls within a given category of service learning. Depending on the color, it can be a volunteering action or a service action that happens only once, or whether we are talking about a learning process but without the service component, or whether we are talking about actually service learning. So that is assessed here. And you can see that this is a volunteering initiative because it meets a social need, but you don't have the curricular content included in that action, and there is no focus on students. We don't have a leading role by students. And the students also try to say how these could be turned into service learning projects. In the case of the support for SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, and they describe the situation, they tell us what this is about. They tell us that this group of students from the School of Engineering developed an app in order to support SMEs with the sale of vouchers. So it shows the three components, and it explains why this is considered a service learning project. This is an example of another Mexican institution. It describes the problem, and then it says these students were able to collect 506,000 Mexican pesos to buy supplies, gloves, goggles, face masks, and deliver them to hospitals. So they assess this action. They say, yes, it meets a social need during the pandemic, but there is no learning component for students, although students do play a very important role in this project. So here they explain why this is not considered service learning and what they could add in order for this experience to be moved to the service learning quadrant. The same was done with other cases, like the Spanish case here on the screen. All the cases assessed over the period of 3 months accounted for a total of 52 projects. But as I told you earlier, this is an online manual, and it allows you to include new cases and new elements as we move forward in this transition in this last few months of the pandemic. So here you have all the contact details. I promised that I was going to be brief, so that will be all on my part. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adriana, and thank you all for sticking to the schedule so that we have time for the final comment and we have time for final questions. Now we're going to welcome Thomas Farnell for him to give us some closing remarks and share some reflections about the interventions of the 4 panelists. Thomas Farnell works as a higher education policy expert at the Institute for the Development of Education, a think tank based in Zagreb, Croatia. He's a co-author of the DEFCAT Toolbox, an institutional self-reflection framework for community engagement in higher education. He's also the author of the recent report, Community Engagement in Higher Education, Trends, Practices and Policies, published by the European Commission 2020. He's currently leading 2 transnational projects to develop a European framework for assessing and supporting community engagement in higher education. Thomas, welcome. The floor is yours.
And hello to everyone. Thanks for the great introduction. It's a real pleasure for me to be here with you today. This evening, it's 8:30 here, 4 in the morning, like in Australia. So I hope you're doing okay, Mathew, and you're still with us. In any case, so a big thank you for the invitation to this event. I've been following the work of the Latin American Center for Service Learning for many years, and it's an honor to be invited to this panel, and it was a real pleasure to hear such interesting views around Latin America and Australia, how service learning has adapted to the pandemic. In fact, I took a few notes, and I have actually a couple of slides. If you don't mind, I'll just share those now. In fact, the slide starts with just a brief introduction, so that you understand who I am and where I'm coming from. So you mentioned your introduction to this project that I'm leading. And I think what's important so that you understand the comments that I will be making is that, so I'm coming from Europe, right? And I'm leading this project about community engagement in higher education in Europe. So why is that important? It's important because actually Europe is far less advanced than most of Latin America, Australia, North America, and possibly with the exception of the UK, in terms of the ways in which universities interact with their community. So there's a lot of activity in Europe, but it hasn't been institutionalized to the extent this has happened in your regions that you presented today. So in a way, I'm here to reflect as to how Europe can learn from around the globe on how community engagement can become a more central part of the higher education landscape in Europe. And as you mentioned, Luis, in the introduction, so we've developed, there are many frameworks for engagement. Well, we've developed one that's slightly different, called an institutional self-reflection framework for community engagement in higher education. It will be actually available in Spanish from next month, which is great, and it will be publicly accessible to all. This is the official translation that we have underneath. And so we're trying to think of how universities can think in a structured, strategic way about how they interact with their external community to address societal needs in greater ways. And of course, service learning is a crucial part of this, but the picture is one that's more, it has more aspects. It also includes, in addition to teaching learning, academic research, scientific research, knowledge exchange, student volunteering. We'll come back to this discussion, and how the management of the university, how the strategic management adopts these questions. So that was just, so I'm really interested in this aspect of institutionalization. How does something like community engagement, social responsibility, service learning become a part of the university's culture and the university's normal way of functioning as a part of its core mission, as opposed to something that academics and students do on the side when they have time. And I was really fascinated to hear all your discussions today, and I made a few notes while you were talking, and I have 5 points that I wanted to reflect on. And the first that I was really interested in is about this distinction between service learning and volunteering. You call them solidarity action, solidarity service, which I think both Manuel and Adriana were talking about, saying it's not the same thing. So obviously service learning is about learning outcomes and benefits for both sides, both for the students and for the communities. And it was interesting to hear how, because of the pandemic, maybe that wasn't always possible to do. So there had to be solidarity actions instead. And I think Mathew you also talked about how we weren't able to do always service learning, so we had a kind of more learning aspect about society and about societal needs. And I think what my takeaway from that is that they are different, but they're both hugely valuable in their own way. And I think if there was more of that in terms of more student volunteering, students applying their knowledge to analyze societal problems, even without the service elements, these are just a range of different ways in which the university community and its students can bring value to society, and not just be kind of the image of the ivory tower of just students and academics closed in on campus, thinking about themselves and about very theoretical ideas. And so I really like this this fact that we think about both of these aspects as being hugely valuable, both volunteering, solidarity actions, and service learning as well. Although I do agree that the goal would be for it to be incorporated and ingrained as a core part of the learning experience of every university, such as the example that you mentioned, Mathew, that it's a core part of the way of every course that's taken. There's a community engagement component that's available to students. So that's the first reflection that I had. The second was about the impact of COVID-19 and how huge challenges and disruptions, but then there's a kind of paradoxical result as well. And there's been a report by the International University Association that's asked universities, 500 universities around the world, how did COVID impact your community engagement? And the finding was a paradoxical one of saying it really disrupted our partnerships. But on the other hand, we're doing much more community engagement of various kinds now. And that was a really interesting thing, that the COVID made universities react to the societal crisis that's happening by responding in various new ways that they went before, by public awareness campaigns, getting engaged in discussions about from vaccines to public health and societal challenges that are coming up because of the crisis. And so in that way, they're being much more community engaged, but some of the partnerships, and again, I'll come back to you, Mathew, this idea that the existing partnerships you had that required the kind of face-to-face and contact, those were really disrupted and I could not replace. And I think that the next point that I'm curious to hear about what you think is that you all noted how COVID-19 then required very creative thinking and quick reaction, and there was the word curricular agility of how we can adapt to the situation and go both virtual or hybrid or do solidarity actions instead of service learning, or do kind of analytical pieces of work with students about societal that isn't also service learning, but that still brings value. And I'm just curious to know what you think. Are some of those experiences in your view maybe actually quite valuable, and that they might stay even if and when we all go back to normal? Would you still keep those online service learning and with these more analytical types of learning experiences, maybe don't require a contact with the community, but that are very relevant to community needs? So I'm just curious to know, will we go back to normal, or are some of these new experiences ones that you would actually like to keep on going? And not just one brief anecdote that I have from my own experience of speaking to colleagues in Ireland, where a professor of entrepreneurship there, who had to work with students, he usually did made students have fundraising projects with community groups. And that obviously all had to go online. And the result was actually far better and far more impactful than when it was face-to-face. So the students raised more money. I think it was 30,000 euros, community groups around Dublin, with disadvantaged social groups. It had much more impact during COVID and this online variant than it was before. And what he said, I don't think I'm going to go back to my old way of doing it. It's much more effective. So I'd be curious just for your comments on whether you think any of those practices will be here to stay and maybe equally or more valuable than some of your other experiences. And the last 2 points that I would make are more get questions for discussion if we'll have time for them. Obviously, I'd like to priority to questions from the audience. But I'm very interested in this question of what are the success factors for institutionalizing service learning at the university. And for what I'm hearing is that you have support of your management and you have support of your academic peers as the acceptance that service learning is something that's a core part of your mission as university. I'm just curious as to, do you still, despite that general support, encounter, what kind of challenges do you encounter to make service learning work? Is there still pressure from your university management and administration to say that this isn't really important, we should focus on kind of research and kind of, getting more money for the university and meeting these metrics for university rankings? I mean, is that a clash of priorities, or are your universities actually quite so committed that it's seen as equally important, or not, if not more important than these other aspects? And finally, I'm just again curious, based on some discussions we've had here in Europe about, in terms of the implementation of service learning in your context, are the teaching staff that are involved in this, do they feel like their work is being sufficiently recognized by the university and the higher education system as a whole? Or are they in a way going against the grain of the system, and they're doing it because they're intrinsically motivated and they're not actually getting the kind of recognition and support from your university and the higher education system? Or is that because this is the experience of most service learning in Europe, it's enthusiasts that are doing it, it's not really institutionalized to that extent. I'm just curious to see whether there's similar challenges in your context, despite the I would say, the quite conducive and positive environment that you have for service learning. So those would be, Luis, my reflections. I'd be really happy if someone would like to come up with some comments of your own based on these reflections. But I'd be really happy to hear other comments from the audience. So I'll pause here. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Thomas. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much, Thomas. You've opened up a lot of space for questions, and we opened the chat for the attendees also to write questions for the panelists. Perhaps we can start combining a question from one of the participants that is asking about what will the university campus be like in the future? What's your approach to the new ways of teaching at the university post-pandemic related to service learning methodology? It has a lot to do with the third point that Thomas mentioned. Who would like to go first?
I'm happy to share a couple of reflections before other panel members. And I think the pandemic has shown that there are new ways of working that can be effective. From home, for example, there is study from home that can be effective. We've never had a greater capacity, technology-wise, to do these things, to have hybrid models of education, hybrid models of work. And I think it was always coming, but the pandemic sped it up. And I don't think we'll ever go back. That's my view. So I think to go with it is the best way forward. But what it means is that people, including students, including community members, are less likely to meet in person for any activity unless it has real meaning, real substance, and real value add. But there are efficiencies and competence, and I would argue wellness, to these hybrid models of work and study in the future. So it does mean that we need to be agile yet again and rethink about, well, what should the university campus be? How should it look? Who should be there? I argue the community should be well defined in that as well. And what does it become? You know, is it more of a town square, a community precinct that meets the needs and desires of so many different community members? Is that enough of a book for these spaces to be viable? And I personally am excited by such a concept, because it goes away from that ivory tower that Thomas mentioned before, where very smart people get to go and hang out together and think about very smart things, to be tongue-in-cheek, to something that is more connected to the community. So to persevere with university seen as a place where you go for lectures, tutorials, and there's an expectation to be there 3 to 5 days a week, I think that's gone. And eventually people vote with their feet, other institutions who are perhaps adjusting.
Adriana, Sonia, Manuel.
Sonia, Manuel, los demás panelistas. Sonia, Manuel, the other panelists, if you can be brief so that we can have space for other questions. Yeah, thank you. I will, I also like to say something about that trigger guiding question that Thomas launched, and I will allow myself to use a term of more bureaucratic flexibility. In the case of our university, UNAM, we have almost 350,000 students in the bachelor's degree. I mean, not counting graduate courses, only in undergraduate courses. So everything that is done in terms of service to the community is very bureaucratic. This level of bureaucracy prevents other activities that are much more specific that teachers might use as an input to propose service learning activity or service learning activities. So the challenge is not only the transition, because we've seen the transition to virtuality is being done, but it does imply a thinking with more communication, more integration, and we see that gradually both the students and the teachers are finding this way of working in a hybrid way. I think the challenge is rather on the management of these activities so that they are good for learning. Thank you. So I will continue. I will try and answer the question, one of the questions by Thomas about the success factors. Here I took a note of 4 ideas, and I add also to a question that somebody wrote in the chat. For our experience, success factors follow 4 axes. First, here we work on the culture of teachers' innovation. We promote that not only through contests or competitions. I told you that I'm part of a center of teacher support, so we're very interested from the institution in generating resources and spaces for training, not only on service learning, but in everything that means to adapt to virtuality, and now moving to this hybrid model. As to resources, there are associated financial resources that the university has contributed. Third, the strong support by the activities. We have a president and vice chancellor, and whenever their support has been requested, from 5 or 30-minute collaborations or writing something or speaking to the media, those are spaces that we're not always recognized in other institutions. So I think that's key. And finally, there's a space for teachers' recognition. When Thomas asks, is this recognized in the institution? I couldn't say for sure that all my institution is at the same level, I mean, supporting the teachers. Some schools perhaps have made more progress in this respect. assigning hours for service learning, and in others they have to compete with research. And finally, to answer Maria Laura that wrote her question in the chat about the multidisciplinary approach, it's something that we have to incorporate. My university is a high complexity university. We have more than 20,000 students in the undergraduate courses. So multidiscipline seems something remote, but centers like ours, based on specific experiences that are systematizing, we are pushing for this innovation that will generate very good results. Thank you, Manuel. Yeah, they're asking here for you to share the links to your materials. Sonia, would you like to add something? Sure. I would also like to mention what has made this service learning methodology successful. At my university, it's important to have more engaged authorities, teachers that are willing to apply this methodology in their courses and make them part of the curricula. And speaking of the students, although it's true that in the past they conducted activities with the community, now they have realized that conducting a service learning project as part of the curricula made them feel that what they learn can have an impact on the community. And also the satisfaction of the community when we apply the various methodologies and we've conducted assessments to determine whether we reached the community, and we realized that the community is now more aware of us. They know our University of St. Mark. We have 20 schools. We're the largest one in Peru. So they're interested. They realize that the university is interested in their society. So that after the pandemic, what are we going to do? Well, we will continue along this path. We will keep motivating the schools and the authorities because it's a way of reaching our most remote communities in the country. Before we couldn't do it because in order to go out to a community, we needed logistics and resources, but now we've seen that we can do it in some areas. Of course, when we, sorry, Sonia, we have some echo. Perhaps you have another device. You have your cell phone besides. Thank you. So as I was saying, we are working, if we keep working along this line, well, we will continue doing so because it will be important for our society. As I was telling you, in the past, we couldn't reach the most remote areas in our country because of financial constraints. But now with the technology, we can do it. And with the right technologies, we can help communities receive what we are offering them. So I think this is a very important stage. I think we have changed, we've had to adapt, but we will continue working this way. We will also, of course, go back to the in-person activities because, I mean, human contact is not the same than being behind a screen, but we will continue working. Thank you, Sonia. There's a comment here in the chat that has to do with one of the topics that Thomas mentioned that has to do with recognizing and supporting teachers. Have you developed specific actions in that respect in recognizing and acknowledging teachers?
No sé quién quisiera responder.
I don't know who would like to answer this question.
I can, oh, sorry, Manuel, you go. Oh, okay. Thanks, Manuel. We went to talk at the same time. Yeah, Thomas, I appreciated your reflections before. I think teacher workload, resourcing, and recognition is an important part of institutionalization. But to reflect at a more meta level to begin with, at ACU, that there has been increasing institutionalization of service learning over time, but we are not yet arrived. You know, there's still a long journey required, and I think FERCO's original work is fantastic, looking at the different pillars that are needed. And I know in our institute, we are advocating for a need to do more to get greater workload, resource, and recognition by promotional criteria for our lecturers. Because our army of enthusiasts as academics is growing, which is great, but even the most enthusiastic person can burn out after some time if they feel like they're not getting the appropriate support. So I think it's ground up, but it also eventually needs to come from top down. And you would be surprised, I think, looking at universities worldwide, even Catholic universities, that are still kind of on that mission and fighting that battle, because not everyone is as sold on service learning in our institution and others as you think. They're still coming to that over time. And as universities become more corporate, which I don't think is necessarily a great thing, just a reality, there is that tension, you know, where you can't, service learning requires a significant amount of investment, time, and knowledge, and it's not always economically efficient to do it. So that's just something to think about.
Quisiera seguir, Manuel.
Would you like to follow up on that, Manuel? Yes. There is no additional recognition given the context. At least in our institution, we have seen a gradual increase of support through different resources. For instance, in my own center, we have the mobile media lab that is a recording studio that would go to teachers' homes in order to allow them to record their lessons. Although we had materials in the universities as we were in a lockdown and the campuses were closed, we couldn't access them. And there are other funds that also support these initiatives. But I think that in the medium and long term, there are many experiences of contributions by faculty that are there on an ongoing basis. Sometimes you have all students that serve as tutors for others. In reflection processes, there are other schools where there is more recognition of the teachers' workload. So I think that this is a very nice audience, and if they want to share experiences with us, we can continue this discussion. I can leave my contact details, but there is a lot to be learned still. I don't have all the answers. There is another school within my university that is still far away from adopting service learning. Thank you, Manuel. We have very little time left, but Adriana and Sonia perhaps would like to comment on this. Yes, I would like to make a comment. In my university, the pandemic has enabled us to move forward with this methodology. Although it is true that in the past we had social outreach activities, now we are including service learning as part of the curriculum. And we are including it within the syllabus. Our president supported us with training on service learning. And that was quite an interesting experience. This happened through the general manager of social responsibility. We have 20 schools. Out of the 20 schools, not all of them are fully convinced to do service learning. So we need to continue raising awareness, providing training, and I'm sure that we will succeed. Because there are other methodologies, but I think that this one is extremely important. We have also received training and support from CLAYSS and other institutions that are working in this field. So I think that we have to continue raising awareness about the benefits for students, for teachers, and of course for our target communities. Thank you, Sonia. Briefly, let me say that we have realized that in the Autonomous University of Mexico, we still have to do more to have recognition for the work done by faculty. But quite recently, we have added emphasis of the social engagement experience of students. So when students graduate, they do not only have their grades because of their academic activities and some other additional activities such as sports activities, they also get information on the community engagement activities or some other activities that are not part of the formal social service syllabus here. So I think that this is quite a significant step forward for a large institution such as our university. Thank you, Adriana. Okay, we are running out of time. Once again, I want to thank you all for your patience with the technical difficulties. I want to thank all those working backstage, Pilar and Maria, our interpreters, and our panelists, and our commentator, and of course, all of you. Please do not forget that we will have the closing session with the students. And another invitation to you, we would like to invite you to attend the global symposium of Universidad that will be held on October the 28th and 29th. It will be a free symposium, an online event, but it requires registration. So we will leave you the link. If you are interested, we are going to talk about the spiritual dimension of service learning and its contribution to the identity and mission of higher education institutions. That would be all. Thank you all for your participation, and we'll meet again tomorrow. We still have some more sessions left. Thank you.
Adiós, que estén bien.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Un gusto.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you all. This has been an excellent panel. Thank you.